Welcome to the Story Lab. I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. The plane touched down with a gentle bump. I let out a sigh of relief, glad to be back in Denver after a long week away. As the other passengers started gathering their belongings, I stayed seated, my mind already at home with Kelsey and the kids. My phone buzzed as soon as I turned it on. A text from my boss. Great job closing that deal, Aaron. Take tomorrow off. Perfect. I grinned, imagining the looks on their faces when I walked through the door tonight instead of tomorrow afternoon. I'd pick up some ice cream on the way home, make it a real celebration. The cab ride felt endless. I kept checking my watch, willing the minutes to pass faster. When we finally pulled up to my street, I practically threw my cash at the driver. Keep the change, I called over my shoulder, already halfway up the front walk with my suitcase. That's when I heard it. Laughter, coming from inside the house. I froze, my hand on the doorknob. It wasn't just Kelsey and the kids. There was a man's voice too, deep and unfamiliar. Frowning, I crept around to the side of the house. The living room curtains were open, warm light spilling out onto the lawn. I inched closer, staying in the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. Kelsey was there, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd seen her in months. Emma and Max were cuddled up on either side of her on the couch, and next to them sat a man I'd never seen before, his arm draped casually around my wife's shoulders. "Come on, guys," the stranger said, ruffling Max's hair. "Give it another try." Emma giggled. "Okay, Dad." The world tilted sideways. I gripped the windowsill to keep from falling. "That's my girl," the man said, beaming. "How about you, buddy?" Max hesitated, looking up at Kelsey. She nodded encouragingly. "It's okay, sweetie," she said softly. "You can say it." "Dad," Max stammered. The stranger pulled him into a hug. "There you go, champ. See? It's not so hard." I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. I had to be dreaming, some bizarre nightmare brought on by jet lag and too much airplane coffee. But Kelsey's next words shattered any hope of that. "I know it feels strange right now," she said, looking between Emma and Max, "but Jason's going to be around a lot more from now on. It's easier this way. He'll be your new father soon." My hands shook as I fumbled for my phone. I hit record just as Jason spoke again. "Your mom's right, kiddos. I know change can be scary, but we're going to be one big happy family. And I promise I'll be the best dad you could ask for." Kelsey leaned in and kissed him, right there in front of our children. "You already are," she murmured. I stumbled back from the window, while rising in my throat. The phone slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete. I snatched it up, stopping the recording. For a long moment, I just stood there in the dark, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to burst through the front door, to scream and rage and demand answers. But a colder, more calculating voice in the back of my head held me back. I looked down at my phone, at the damning evidence I just captured. No, this needed to be handled carefully, methodically. I'd make them pay for this betrayal, but I'd do it right. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and strode back to the front of the house. I opened the door as quietly as possible and slipped inside. "I'm home," I called out, injecting false cheer into my voice. There was a flurry of movement from the living room. I walked in just in time to see Jason scrambling off the couch, putting distance between himself and my family. "Daddy," Emma cried, running to hug me. I scooped her up, burying my face in her hair to hide the fury I knew must be showing in my eyes. "Hey, princess," I said. "I missed you so much." Max hung back, looking uncertainly between me and Jason. My heart clenched. Kelsey stood, smoothing down her shirt. "Aaron, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." "Surprise," I said flatly. I set Emma down and turned to Jason, who was trying his best to look casual. "And who might you be?" Jason cleared his throat. "Jason Cole," he said, extending his hand. "I'm, a friend of Kelsey's from work." I ignored his outstretched hand. "Funny, Kelsey's never mentioned you before." An awkward silence fell over the room. I could see the gears turning in Kelsey's head as she tried to salvage the situation. "Jason just stopped by to drop off some paperwork," she said quickly. "We got to talking, and I guess we lost track of time. Jason was actually just leaving." weren't you? Jason nodded, already edging towards the door. Right, yes. I should get going. It was nice meeting you, Aaron. I smiled tightly. Oh, the pleasure was all mine. As soon as the door closed behind him, I turned to Kelsey. Kids, why don't you go up to your rooms for a bit? Mommy and I need to talk. Emma opened her mouth to protest, but something in my expression must have warned her off. She took Max's hand and led him upstairs. Kelsey waited until we heard their bedroom doors close. Aaron, I can explain. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Save it. I heard everything. The color drained from her face. What do you mean? Without a word, I pulled out my phone and pressed play. Kelsey's voice filled the room. It's easier this way. He'll be your new father soon. Kelsey sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. Oh God. I stopped the recording, my voice deathly calm. How long? She looked up, tears streaming down her face. Aaron, please. How long? Kelsey's shoulders slumped in defeat. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months. Half a year of lies. Of betrayal. While I worked long hours to provide for our family, she'd been destroying it. Pack your things, I said coldly. You're leaving tonight. What? No. Kelsey jumped to her feet. You can't just kick me out. What about the kids? I laughed humorlessly. You should have thought about that before you decided to replace me with your new boyfriend. That's not fair, she cried. I never meant for this to happen. Things haven't been right between us for a long time, Aaron. You're always working, always distracted. Jason, he makes me feel alive again. And that justifies trying to erase me from our children's lives? I spat, making them call another man dad behind my back? Kelsey flinched. I was going to tell you. I didn't know how. Well, now you don't have to. I pulled out my phone again. I'm calling the police. They can make sure you leave peacefully. The police? Kelsey's eyes widened in panic. Aaron, please, we can work this out. For the kids. Don't you dare use our children as a shield, I growled. You lost that right the moment you decided to betray us all. As I dialed, Kelsey sank back onto the couch, her sobs muffled by her hands. I turned away, steeling myself against any lingering shred of sympathy. Hello, police. I need an officer to come to my home. I'm removing my wife from the premises and want to ensure there are no issues. The next hour passed in a blur. Flashing lights outside our normally quiet suburban home. Neighbors peeking out their windows, whispering behind cupped hands. The kids huddled in Emma's room, confused and frightened by the commotion. Officer Jim Reynolds, a stocky man with kind eyes, stood in our living room. He looked between Kelsey and me, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Ma'am, he said gently, I understand this is difficult, but your husband has the legal right to ask you to leave. Do you have somewhere you can go for the night? Kelsey nodded mutely, mascara streaking her tear-stained cheeks. My sisters, she mumbled. I felt a twinge of something. Regret? Pity? I pushed it aside. I'll have your things sent over tomorrow, I said stiffly. As Kelsey gathered some essentials, I pulled Officer Reynolds aside. I have evidence of my wife's infidelity, I said in a low voice, and of her attempting to alienate me from my children. I'd like to get your statement about tonight, in case I need it for future legal proceedings. The officer's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. Of course, sir. I'd be happy to provide an official statement of what I've witnessed here. Thank you, I said. I appreciate your professionalism in handling this. A car horn honked outside. Jason, come to whisk away his mistress now that their perfect little plan had imploded. Kelsey stood in the doorway, overnight bag in hand. She looked small, defeated. Nothing like the laughing, carefree woman I'd seen through the window earlier. Can I say goodbye to the kids? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Part of me wanted to refuse, to deny her even that small comfort. But I thought of Emma and Max, how confused and scared they must be. 2 minutes, I said. Officer Reynolds will accompany you. As they headed upstairs, I sank onto the couch, suddenly bone-weary. The adrenaline that had been fueling me was fading, leaving a холодная пустота in its wake. A sob from upstairs. Emma's voice, high and panicked. Mommy, why are you leaving? Don't go. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to break. I had to be strong. For them. Kelsey's footsteps on the stairs, slower now, heavier. She paused in the entryway, looking lost. Aaron, she began. I cut her off. Don't. There's nothing left to say. She nodded, fresh tears spilling over. Without another word, she walked out the front door. I watched from the window as Jason helped her into his car. He glanced up at the house, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. I stared back coldly until he looked away. As they drove off, Officer Reynolds cleared his throat. Will you be all right, sir? Do you have someone who can come stay with you and the kids tonight? I shook my head. We'll be fine. Thank you for your help. After he left, I climbed the stairs on leaden feet. Emma's door was closed. I could hear her muffled crying inside. I knocked softly. Emma? Max? Can I come in? No answer, but the crying quieted. I eased the door open. They were huddled together on Emma's bed, a tangle of limbs and tear-stained faces. My heart shattered all over again. Hey, kiddos, I said, forcing a smile. Mind if I join you? Emma launched herself into my arms. Daddy, why did Mommy leave? Is she coming back? I held her close, stroking her hair. Mommy needs some time away right now, but I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. I've got you. Max crawled over, his lower lip trembling. Are you and Mommy getting a divorce? Like Tommy's parents? Christ, how do you explain something like this to a 5-year-old? I pulled him into the hug. I don't know what's going to happen yet, buddy. But what I do know is that both your mom and I love you very, very much. That's never going to change, no matter what. We stayed like that for a long time, the three of us clinging to each other. Eventually, their sniffles subsided, replaced by the deep, even breathing of exhausted sleep. I tucked them into Emma's bed, not having the heart to separate them tonight. As I turned to leave, Max's sleepy voice stopped me. Daddy? Yeah, champ? I'm glad you're home. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. Me too, buddy. Me too. Downstairs, I poured myself a generous whiskey and sank onto the couch. The house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. I pulled out my phone, staring at the recording I'd made earlier. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend this was all a bad dream I could wake up from. But I knew better. This was just the beginning of the fight, and I'd need every weapon in my arsenal. With a heavy sigh, I pulled up my contacts and dialed a number I'd hoped I'd never need. Rachel? It's Aaron Brooks. I need your help. How soon can you meet? The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, fitting my mood perfectly. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between comforting the kids and poring over legal websites on my laptop. I was in the kitchen, mechanically stirring a pot of oatmeal, when my phone buzzed. Rachel. Aaron? I can meet you at my office in an hour. Will that work? I glanced at the clock. Emma and Max would be up soon, needing breakfast and reassurance I wasn't sure how to give. Make it 2 hours? I asked. I need to get the kids settled first. Of course, Rachel replied, her voice softening. Take whatever time you need. And Aaron? Try to breathe. Okay? We'll get through this. I managed a weak chuckle. Thanks, Rachel. I'll see you soon. After a subdued breakfast where I dodged most of Emma and Max's questions with vague reassurances, I called my neighbor, Mrs. Chun. She agreed to watch the kids for a few hours, her usually cheery voice tinged with concern. Aaron, if there's anything else we can do? She started. Thank you. I cut her off, not ready to face the pity I knew I'd see in her eyes. I'll pick them up this afternoon. The drive to Rachel's office passed in a blur. Before I knew it, I was sitting across from her, a cup of coffee cooling untouched in front of me. Rachel leaned forward, her dark eyes sharp and focused. All right, Aaron. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything. I took a deep breath and began to speak. As the whole sordid tale spilled out, Rachel's expression grew increasingly grim. When I finished, she sat back, tapping her pen against her notepad. Well, the good news is, you have solid evidence of your wife's infidelity and her attempts to alienate you from your children. That recording is going to be crucial. And the bad news? I asked, bracing myself. Rachel sighed. Custody battles are never easy, Aaron. They're messy, they're emotional, and they can drag on for months. Are you prepared for that? I met her gaze steadily. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my kids. She nodded, a hint of approval in her eyes. Good, because Kelsey's not going to go down without a fight. Especially not if this Jason character has money to throw at expensive lawyers. My jaw clenched at the mention of his name. What do we do first? Document everything, Rachel said firmly. Every interaction with Kelsey, every conversation about the kids. Keep a detailed log of when you have them, what you do together, any issues that come up. We need to build a rock-solid case that you're the more stable, reliable parent. I pulled out my phone, already creating a new note. Got it. What else? We'll need character witnesses. Teachers, neighbors, anyone who can speak to your relationship with Emma and Max. And she hesitated. What? I prompted. Rachel looked at me seriously. We need to dig into Jason's background. If he's going to be around your kids, we need to know everything about him. Any skeletons in his closet could work in our favor. I leaned forward, a grim smile tugging at my lips. I'm all ears. Rachel tapped her pen thoughtfully. We'll need a private investigator. Someone discreet, but thorough. I know just the person. Do it, I said without hesitation. Whatever it costs. She nodded, scribbling a note. I'll make the call today. Now, about the kids' schedules. We spent the next hour going over every detail of my plan to secure full custody. By the time I left Rachel's office, my head was spinning, but I felt more focused than I had since that fateful night. As I drove home, my phone rang. Kelsey's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering. What do you want, Kelsey? Her voice was small, choked with tears. Aaron, please, can we talk about this? The kids are fine. I cut her off. They're with Mrs. Chun right now. Mrs. Chun? Kelsey's tone sharpened. Why aren't you with them? I gritted my teeth. I had an appointment. Not that it's any of your business anymore. Of course it's my business. They're my children too. Really? I shot back. Because last night, you seemed pretty eager to replace me with your new boyfriend. Kelsey's sharp intake of breath crackled over the line. That's not fair. I never meant. Save it for the judge, Kelsey, I said coldly. My lawyer will be in touch about visitation arrangements. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The house was quiet when I got home, the silence a stark reminder of how much had changed in just 24 hours. I sank onto the couch, pulling out my phone to review the notes from my meeting with Rachel. A text from Mrs. Chun popped up. Kids are doing okay. Emma asked about Mommy. What should I tell her? I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of exhaustion. How the hell was I supposed to explain this mess to a 7-year-old? With a sigh, I started typing. Just tell her Mommy and Daddy are working some things out. I'll pick them up soon and we'll talk. As I hit send, a fierce determination washed over me. I'd do whatever it took to protect Emma and Max from the fallout of Kelsey's betrayal, no matter the cost. The next few weeks passed in a blur of lawyer meetings, whispered phone calls, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into gathering every shred of evidence I could to build my case for full custody. Today's mission, Emma's school. I'd set up a meeting with her teacher, Ms. Martinez, hoping she could provide some insight into how the chaos at home was affecting my daughter. As I walked into the cheerful second-grade classroom, Ms. Martinez greeted me with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming in, she said, gesturing to a tiny chair across from her desk. I know things must be difficult right now. I lowered myself onto the comically small seat, trying to look composed. I appreciate your time, Ms. Martinez. How's Emma doing? She hesitated, fidgeting with a stack of papers. Well, that's actually why I wanted to speak with you. I've noticed some changes in Emma's behavior lately. My stomach clenched. What kind of changes? She's become more withdrawn, Ms. Martinez explained gently. Less engaged in class activities. And there have been a few incidents on the playground. Incidents? I echoed, leaning forward. Ms. Martinez sighed. Nothing too serious, but she's gotten into a couple of shoving matches with classmates. It's very out of character for her. Guilt gnawing at me. I'm so sorry. We're going through some family issues at home. I gathered as much, she said softly. Emma mentioned that her mother isn't living at home right now. I nodded stiffly. We're separated. It's complicated. Ms. Martinez's expression was sympathetic. I see. Mr. Brooks, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is there anything we can do here at school to help Emma through this transition? I latched onto her words like a lifeline. Actually, yes. I'm in the process of seeking full custody of Emma and her brother. Would you be willing to provide a statement about Emma's recent behavior changes? And maybe your observations of my involvement as a parent? She blinked, clearly surprised by my directness. Oh, well, I suppose I could. Please, I interrupted, leaning forward. I know it's a lot to ask, but I need to show the court that I'm the more stable parent, that I'm involved in every aspect of Emma's life. Ms. Martinez's brow furrowed. Mr. Brooks, I'm not sure I'm comfortable taking sides in a custody dispute. I'm not asking you to take sides, I said quickly, just to state the facts as you've observed them. Emma's changed behavior, my attendance at parent-teacher conferences, that sort of thing. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I can provide a factual statement about what I've seen in the classroom. But Mr. Brooks? Yes? Her eyes were kind but firm. My primary concern is Emma's well-being. I hope both you and your wife keep that in mind throughout this process. I swallowed hard, pushing down a flare of defensiveness. Of course. Thank you, Ms. Martinez. I really appreciate your help. As I left the school, my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. I found something on Jason. Meet me at my office ASAP. My heart raced as I drove across town. What could they have dug up? I barely remembered to call Mrs. Chun to ask her to keep the kids a little longer. Rachel was waiting for me, a thick folder on her desk. Aaron, sit down. We've hit the jackpot. I perched on the edge of my seat. What did you find? She opened the folder, spreading out several documents. Jason Cole isn't the upstanding businessman he pretends to be. Our investigator uncovered a history of shady financial dealings, including a fraud conviction from 10 years ago. My eyes widened. Are you serious? Rachel nodded. That's not all. There's a sealed record from his early 20s we're still trying to access, but the investigator thinks it might be related to a domestic violence charge. I felt sick. And Kelsey's been letting this man around our children? Exactly, Rachel said, her eyes gleaming. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to show the court that Kelsey's judgment is compromised. Between this and the recording of her trying to alienate you from the kids, we've got a strong case for full custody. I slumped back in my chair, overwhelmed. What's our next move? Rachel started gathering the documents. We need to get statements from anyone who can speak to your character and involvement as a father. Teachers, neighbors, colleagues. The more, the better. I nodded, my mind racing. I've already talked to Emma's teacher. And Officer Reynolds, the cop who came to the house that night, said he'd be willing to make a statement. Perfect, Rachel said approvingly. Keep building that support network. And Aaron? Document every interaction with Kelsey. Every phone call, every text. We need to show a pattern of her erratic behavior. As I left Rachel's office, my phone buzzed again. Kelsey. I answered warily. Hello? Aaron, we need to talk, Kelsey said, her voice tight. About the kids' schedule. This back and forth isn't working. I took a deep breath, remembering Rachel's advice. Stay calm. Document everything. Okay, I said evenly. What did you have in mind? Kelsey launched into a convoluted plan involving split weeks and alternating weekends. I listened silently, my jaw clenching tighter with each word. When she finished, I spoke carefully. Kelsey, I don't think that's in the best interest of the kids. They need stability right now, not constant shuffling between houses. She scoffed. Oh, and I suppose you think keeping them from me entirely is better? That's not what I said, I countered, fighting to keep my voice level. But given recent events, I think it's best if the kids primarily stay with me for now. Recent events? Kelsey's voice rose. What's that supposed to mean? I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before responding. It means I'm not comfortable with Jason being around Emma and Max, Kelsey. Not until we've worked things out legally. You can't do that, she cried. You can't keep my children from me. I'm not trying to, I said firmly. But my priority is their safety and well-being. If you want to see them, it needs to be supervised visits for now. Kelsey's voice turned cold. You'll regret this, Aaron. I swear to God, you'll regret this. The line went dead. I leaned against my car, my hands shaking as I pulled up my notes app to document the conversation. As I drove to pick up the kids, my mind raced with everything that had happened. The evidence against Jason, Kelsey's threats, Emma's troubles at school. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a determination settling over me. No matter what it took, I'd protect my children. From Kelsey's poor choices, from Jason's shady past, from all of it. The battle for custody was just beginning, but I was ready for war. The courthouse loomed before me, its imposing facade a stark reminder of the battle ahead. I adjusted my tie, took a deep breath, and walked inside. Rachel was waiting in the lobby, her expression a mix of determination and concern. Ready for this, Aaron? I nodded, my throat tight, as I'll ever be. We made our way to the courtroom, the click of Rachel's heels echoing in the marble hallway. As we rounded the corner, I saw them, Kelsey and Jason, huddled with their lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Kelsey's eyes met mine, a flash of something crossing her face. Regret? Anger? Before I could decipher it, Jason put his arm around her, steering her into the courtroom. Rachel touched my arm. Remember, stay calm no matter what. Let me do the talking unless the judge directly addresses you. I took another deep breath, squaring my shoulders. Got it. The next few hours were a blur of legal jargon and barely contained emotion. Kelsey's lawyer painted me as a workaholic, neglectful father, twisting my long hours into evidence of disinterest in my children's lives. Your Honor, he said smoothly, Mr. Brooks claims to want full custody, and yet his own work records show he's rarely home before 8 p.m. How can he possibly provide the stable environment these children need? I gritted my teeth, my hands clenching under the table. Rachel squeezed my arm in warning before standing. If I may, Your Honor, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. Mr. Brooks's dedication to his career is precisely what has allowed him to provide a comfortable life for his children. Moreover, since the separation, he has adjusted his schedule to be home every day by 5 p.m., as evidenced by the affidavits from his employer and neighbors. The judge nodded, making a note. Continue, Ms. Turner. Rachel's eyes gleamed. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, a recording made by my client on the night he discovered his wife's infidelity. Kelsey's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet courtroom. Her lawyer leapt to his feet. Objection. This recording was obtained without my client's knowledge or consent. The judge peered over his glasses. Colorado is a one-party consent state, Counselor. Overruled. You may play the recording, Ms. Turner. As Kelsey's voice filled the courtroom, urging our children to call another man Dad, I watched the color drain from her face. Jason shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to meet anyone's eyes. When it finished, a heavy silence fell over the room. The judge's expression was grave as he turned to Kelsey. Mrs. Brooks, do you deny that this is your voice on the recording? Kelsey's lawyer whispered furiously in her ear, but she shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, Your Honor. That's me. Rachel pressed our advantage. Your Honor, this recording clearly demonstrates Mrs. Brooks's attempts to alienate the children from their father. Furthermore, we have evidence that the man in question, Jason Cole, has a criminal record including fraud and suspected domestic violence. Jason's head snapped up, his face a mask of shock and fury. Kelsey turned to him, confusion and betrayal written across her features. Their lawyer scrambled to regain control. Your Honor, my clients were unaware of any criminal history. Mr. Cole's past mistakes have no bearing on his current character or Mrs. Brooks's fitness as a mother. The judge held up a hand, silencing him. I'll be the judge of that, Counselor. Ms. Turner, do you have documentation of these allegations? Rachel nodded, producing a file. Yes, Your Honor. We have Mr. Cole's sealed records, which our investigator was able to unseal, as well as statements from his former business partners detailing his fraudulent practices. As the damning evidence was presented, I watched Kelsey's face crumple. She turned to Jason, whispering furiously. He shook his head, his expression hardening. The judge's voice cut through their hushed argument. Mrs. Brooks, given this new information, do you still believe it's in your children's best interest to be around Mr. Cole? Kelsey hesitated, looking between Jason and me. I held my breath, willing her to make the right choice. I don't know, Your Honor, she finally said, her voice small. I thought I knew him, but now? The judge nodded gravely. I see. Well, given the evidence presented today, I'm inclined to grant temporary full custody to Mr. Brooks, with supervised visitation for Mrs. Brooks, pending a full investigation into Mr. Cole's background and Mrs. Brooks's judgment in this matter. Relief washed over me, so powerful I nearly sagged in my chair. Rachel squeezed my shoulder, a small smile of triumph on her face. Kelsey's anguished cry cut through the courtroom. No, please, Your Honor. You can't take my children. The judge's expression softened slightly. Mrs. Brooks, this is a temporary arrangement. If you can demonstrate that you're putting your children's needs first and exercising better judgment in your personal life, we can revisit the custody arrangement. But for now, this is what's best for Emma and Max. As the judge's gavel fell, finalizing his decision, chaos erupted in the courtroom. Kelsey collapsed into sobs, while Jason stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Their lawyer looked shell-shocked, gathering papers with shaking hands. Rachel turned to me, her eyes shining. We did it, Aaron. It's not over, but this is a huge win. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We'd won this battle, but the war was far from over. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that there were no real winners here, only casualties. As we left the courtroom, I steeled myself for the challenges ahead, explaining this to Emma and Max, navigating supervised visits with Kelsey, protecting my children from the fallout of this mess. But for now, for this moment, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. We were one step closer to the stability and security my children deserved, and I'd fight with everything I had to make sure they got it. The courtroom was buzzing with tension as we returned from a brief recess. I could feel Kelsey's eyes boring into me from across the aisle, but I kept my gaze fixed straight ahead. Rachel had warned me to stay focused, no matter what. As we settled back into our seats, the judge cleared his throat. Before we conclude these proceedings, I understand the plaintiff's counsel has some additional evidence to present? Rachel stood, her expression unreadable. Yes, Your Honor. If it pleases the court, we have one final piece of information that we believe is crucial to Your Honor's decision regarding custody. Kelsey's lawyer jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. We weren't notified of any new evidence. The judge peered over his glasses. Ms. Turner, is this true? Rachel nodded calmly. Your Honor, this information only came to light during the recess. Given its relevance to the children's well-being, we felt it was imperative to bring it to the court's attention immediately. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. I'll allow it. Proceed, Ms. Turner. Rachel straightened, her eyes gleaming with determination. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to present evidence of Mr. Jason Cole's criminal record, which includes convictions for fraud and domestic violence. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Kelsey's face drained of color as she whipped around to stare at Jason, who sat rigid in his seat, jaw clenched. Objection. Kelsey's lawyer sputtered. This is highly prejudicial, Your Honor. Mr. Cole isn't on trial here. The judge held up a hand. Overruled. While Mr. Cole may not be on trial, his character and background are relevant to Mrs. Brooks's judgment in allowing him around the children. Continue, Ms. Turner. Rachel nodded, producing a thick file. Your Honor, our private investigator uncovered sealed records from Mr. Cole's past. They detail a pattern of financial fraud spanning several years, culminating in a conviction 10 years ago. More alarmingly, there's also a domestic violence charge from his early 20s. I watched Kelsey's face crumple as Rachel laid out the damning evidence. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously, but she shook her head, eyes never leaving Jason. Furthermore, Rachel continued, we have statements from Mr. Cole's former business partners describing ongoing fraudulent practices. Your Honor, Mrs. Brooks has not only attempted to alienate the children from their father, but has also exposed them to a man with a violent criminal past. The judge's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the documents. Mrs. Brooks, he said, his voice stern, were you aware of Mr. Cole's history when you allowed him around your children? Kelsey's voice quavered as she responded. No, Your Honor. I had no idea. And now that you do know, the judge pressed, do you still believe it's in your children's best interest to be in Mr. Cole's presence? Kelsey hesitated, glancing between Jason and me. I held my breath, silently willing her to make the right choice. I don't know, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge nodded, his expression softening slightly. I see. Well, given this new information and Mrs. Brooks's uncertainty, I have no choice but to grant full custody to Mr. Brooks. Relief flooded through me, so intense I nearly sagged in my chair. Rachel squeezed my arm, a small smile of triumph on her face. Mrs. Brooks will be granted supervised visitation, pending completion of parenting classes and a psychological evaluation, the judge continued. Mr. Cole is to have no contact with the children. This court condemns Mrs. Brooks's poor judgment in this matter and urges her to prioritize her children's well-being moving forward. As the gavel fell, finalizing the decision, chaos erupted in the courtroom. Kelsey burst into tears, while Jason stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Their lawyer looked shell-shocked, gathering papers with shaking hands. Rachel turned to me, her eyes shining. We did it, Aaron. It's over. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. We'd won, but as I watched Kelsey's shoulders shake with sobs, I felt no joy in our victory. Only a determination to protect my children and build a new life for us, free from the shadow of betrayal. The weeks following the custody hearing passed in a blur of paperwork, therapy appointments for the kids, and long nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd done the right thing. But as I watched Emma and Max slowly start to smile again, to laugh without that haunted look in their eyes, I knew I'd made the only choice I could. One morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through emails, a message from an unfamiliar address caught my eye. The subject line read, "Information you might find interesting, J. Cole." Frowning, I opened it. Inside was a trove of documents detailing Jason's ongoing fraudulent business practices, far beyond what we presented in court. My hands shook as I realized the implications. This wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. This was a chance to make sure Jason could never hurt anyone else. I picked up my phone, hesitating only a moment before dialing. Megan Blake, Denver Tribune. I took a deep breath. Ms. Blake? This is Aaron Brooks. I have a story you might be interested in. Megan's voice sharpened with interest. Mr. Brooks? The software engineer who just won that high-profile custody case. The very same, I replied. But this isn't about my personal life. It's about Jason Cole, the man my ex-wife was involved with. I have evidence of ongoing criminal activity that I think the public needs to know about. There was a pause, then the sound of shuffling papers. I'm listening, Mr. Brooks. Can you come to my office this afternoon? As I hung up, a mix of emotions churned in my gut. Was I doing this for justice or for revenge? Did it matter, as long as it kept Jason away from my family? Later that day, I sat across from Megan in her cluttered office, watching her eyes widen as she pored over the documents. This is explosive, Mr. Brooks, she said finally, looking up at me. How did you come by this information? I shook my head. I can't reveal my source, but I can assure you it's reliable. Everything in those files is verifiable. Megan leaned back, tapping her pen against her notepad. You realize publishing this could ruin Jason Cole? His business, his reputation, everything. I'm aware, I said quietly. But isn't that what should happen to someone who's been defrauding people for years? Who has a history of violence? She studied me for a long moment. This isn't just about justice, is it? This is personal for you. I met her gaze steadily. My only concern is protecting my children and making sure Jason can't hurt anyone else. What you do with that information is up to you. Megan nodded slowly. All right, Mr. Brooks. I'll look into this, verify everything independently. If it checks out, well, let's just say Mr. Cole's going to have a very bad week. As I left her office, my phone buzzed. A text from my private investigator, Mark Harris. Got more dirt on Cole. Financial records show he's in deep with some shady creditors. Want me to pass along an anonymous tip? I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. This was my chance to truly destroy Jason, to ensure he could never threaten my family again. But was I crossing a line? After a long moment, I typed back, do it. The next few days passed in a haze of anticipation and guilt. I threw myself into work and time with the kids, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Then, on a sunny Tuesday morning, it all exploded. Megan's article hit the front page of the Tribune, exposing Jason's years of fraud in excruciating detail. By lunchtime, his company's stock had plummeted. By dinner, the police were at his door with a search warrant. I watched it all unfold on the news, a surreal feeling washing over me. I'd set this in motion. I'd brought Jason Cole's world crashing down around him. My phone rang. Kelsey's number flashed on the screen. I answered warily. Aaron? Her voice was thick with tears. Did you see the news? About Jason? I saw, I said neutrally. Did you? Did you have anything to do with this? I paused, choosing my words carefully. I may have passed along some information to a journalist. The rest was all Jason's doing. Kelsey's breath hitched. God, Aaron. I can't believe all of this. I feel so stupid. How could I not have seen what he really was? A wave of unexpected sympathy washed over me. He fooled a lot of people, Kelsey. Not just you. The kids, she said suddenly. Are they okay? Do they know what's happening? They're fine, I assured her. I've kept them away from the news. As far as they know, nothing's changed. There was a long silence. Then, in a small voice, Kelsey asked, Do you think maybe I could see them soon? I miss them so much, Aaron. I closed my eyes, conflicting emotions warring within me. Let's take it one step at a time, okay? Focus on your therapy and parenting classes. We'll revisit visitation when the dust settles. As I hung up, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Jason was out of our lives for good. Kelsey was starting to see the error of her ways. Maybe, just maybe, we could all start to heal. Months passed, and slowly, life began to settle into a new normal. The kids and I fell into a comfortable routine. Our home once again filled with laughter and warmth. The haunted look in Emma and Max's eyes faded, replaced by a cautious optimism that made my heart swell. One sunny Saturday morning, as I flipped pancakes and listened to the kids bicker good-naturedly over the comics section, I realized I was happy, truly, genuinely happy for the first time in what felt like forever. Dad. Emma's voice broke through my reverie. Max is hogging the sports page again. I chuckled, sliding the last pancake onto a plate. Max, share with your sister. Emma, there's plenty of paper to go around. As we sat down to breakfast, Max looked up at me with syrup-sticky fingers. Dad, is Mom coming to my soccer game today? I paused, carefully considering my words. Kelsey had been making progress in her therapy and parenting classes, and we'd slowly started reintroducing supervised visits. But we were still a long way from anything resembling normalcy. Not today, buddy, I said gently. But maybe next time, okay? Mom's still working on some things. Emma pushed her eggs around her plate. Is she ever going to live with us again? My heart clenched. I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that both your mom and I love you very much, even if things are different now. After breakfast, as I cleaned up the kitchen, my phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. How are you holding up? Want to grab coffee sometime this week? I smiled, warmth spreading through my chest. Rachel and I had grown closer in the months since the custody battle. Our relationship evolving from lawyer-client to something that felt a lot like friendship. And lately, I've been wondering if there might be potential for something more. Sounds great, I texted back. Tuesday work for you? As I hit send, A small voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Was I ready for this? Was it too soon? But then I heard Emma's laughter floating in from the living room, and I pushed the doubts aside. We'd been through hell and back. Maybe it was time to start living again, not just surviving. The next few weeks passed in a blur of soccer games, school projects, and stolen moments with Rachel. Our coffee date turned into dinner, which turned into long walks in the park, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, as we strolled along the river, Rachel turned to me with a serious expression. Aaron, can I ask you something? I nodded, suddenly nervous. Of course. Are you sure you're ready for this? She asked softly. For us? I know you've been through so much, and the last thing I want is to complicate things for you or the kids. I stopped walking, taking her hands in mine. Rachel, you've been nothing but a source of strength and support through all of this. You've seen me at my worst, and you're still here. If anything, you've made things clearer, not more complicated. She smiled, her eyes shining in the fading light. So, what are you saying? I took a deep breath. I'm saying, I'd like to see where this goes, if you're willing. Rachel's answer came in the form of a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. As we walked back to my car hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. There would still be challenges with Kelsey, with the kids adjusting to our new reality. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, innocuous white paper with my name scrawled in familiar handwriting. Kelsey's handwriting. My stomach clenched as I tore it open, dreading what I might find inside. It was an eviction notice. Kelsey was being kicked out of her apartment, effective immediately. My first instinct was relief she'd be further from the kids. But as I read her desperate plea for help scribbled at the bottom, a more complex emotion took hold. I stood there in the kitchen, conflict raging within me. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let Kelsey face the consequences of her actions. But another part, the part that remembered the good times, the mother of my children, couldn't just leave her out in the cold. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Where are you going, Dad? Emma called from the living room. I hesitated. I need to take care of something, sweetie. I'll be back soon. Keep an eye on your brother, okay? The drive to Kelsey's apartment complex was tense, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. What was I doing? Why was I rushing to her rescue after everything she'd put us through? As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw her. Kelsey was sitting on the curb, surrounded by hastily packed boxes, her head in her hands. For a moment, I just sat there, watching her. Then, with a deep breath, I got out of the car. Kelsey? She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. Aaron, what are you doing here? I held up the envelope. You sent me this, remember? Kelsey scrambled to her feet, hope and desperation warring on her face. I didn't think you'd actually come. After everything. Yeah, well, neither did I said quietly. What happened? She laughed bitterly. What happened? Everything fell apart, that's what happened. Jason, he's gone. Took off as soon as things got tough. Left me with nothing but debts and broken promises. I felt a twinge of guilt. I'd set all this in motion, after all, but I pushed it aside. And the apartment? Couldn't make rent, Kelsey said, gesturing to the boxes around her. Turns out, when your boyfriend's a fraud and you've alienated everyone else in your life, you don't have a lot of options. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then Kelsey spoke again, her voice small and broken. Aaron, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that. I was stupid and selfish, and I hurt the people I love most in the world. I closed my eyes, memories of our life together flashing through my mind. The good times, the bad times, all of it. When I opened them again, I saw not the woman who had betrayed me, but the mother of my children. A human being who had made terrible mistakes and was now facing the consequences. Kelsey, I said slowly, I can't fix this for you. You understand that, right? She nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I know. I didn't know who else to turn to. I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. I can help you find a place to stay for a few nights. A hotel or something. But after that, you're on your own. You need to figure this out for yourself. Relief flooded Kelsey's face. Thank you, Aaron. I don't deserve your kindness. No, I agreed, you don't. But our kids deserve a mother who's not living on the streets. So let's get your stuff loaded up and find you a room for the night. As we worked to load Kelsey's meager belongings into my car, a thought occurred to me. What about your sister? Can't you stay with her? Kelsey's shoulders slumped. She won't take my calls anymore. Not after everything that happened with the custody battle. I nodded, understanding all too well the bridges Kelsey had burned. Once her things were loaded, I turned to her one last time. Kelsey, listen to me. This is your rock bottom. What you do from here is up to you. But if you ever want a chance at being part of our kids' lives again, you need to get your act together. For real this time. She nodded, wiping away tears. I understand. Thank you, Aaron, for everything. As I drove Kelsey to a nearby hotel, an uncomfortable silence filled the car. I could feel her eyes on me, heavy with unspoken words and regret. Finally, as we pulled into the hotel parking lot, Kelsey spoke. Aaron, I know I have no right to ask this, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I gripped the steering wheel tighter, emotions warring within me. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her of all the pain she'd caused. But another part, the part that remembered the good times, felt a twinge of sympathy. Forgiveness isn't something I can just give you, Kelsey, I said carefully. It's something you'll have to earn. And not for me, but for Emma and Max. They deserve a mother who puts them first. Kelsey nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I want to be that mother, Aaron. I want to make things right. I turned to face her, my expression serious. Then prove it. Get a job. Find a stable place to live. Show up for your therapy sessions and parenting classes. Actions speak louder than words. As we unloaded her belongings, Kelsey paused, looking lost and small among her boxes. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not strong enough? For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago, vulnerable, unsure, but with a spark of determination in her eyes. I softened slightly. You are strong enough, Kelsey. You're the mother of my children, but you have to want it. You have to fight for it. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. I will. I promise. As I turned to leave, Kelsey called out one last time. Aaron? I paused, looking back. Thank you, she said softly, for not giving up on me completely. I nodded, unable to form words past the lump in my throat. As I drove away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd done what I could. The rest was up to Kelsey. Months passed. Kelsey stuck to her word, slowly rebuilding her life and proving herself worthy of supervised visits with the kids. It wasn't easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but I saw genuine effort and change. One sunny afternoon, as I watched Emma and Max laugh and play with their mother in the park, Rachel's hand warm in mine, I realized something. The anger and bitterness that had consumed me for so long had finally begun to fade. We weren't the family we once were, and we never would be again. But we were something new. Something, dare I say it, better. Stronger for having weathered the storm. As we walked back to the car, Emma slipped her hand into mine. Dad, she said, looking up at me with those big, wise eyes. I'm glad we're all okay now. I squeezed her hand, a lump forming in my throat. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. And in that moment, I knew. We had finally found our way to the other side of betrayal, to forgiveness, to healing, to a new beginning. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.